But yeah, there we go. I think recording is on. All right, cool. So I'm going to dive right in. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is planning, right? And the plan is the foundation your campaign is built on and the ruler that we'll use to measure success. It is by far the most important part of any campaign. So I'm going to spend a little time there. As we go through this, we ask ourselves a few questions whenever we start planning a digital campaign. What are we trying to achieve and why? Who are we trying to reach or influence? That'd be our audience. Why they should want to do what we want them to do. And then what resources we're going to need to get them to do it. And this applies across the board. Any marketing campaign, you should be asking yourselves these questions. But for the sake of today's conversation, I'm going to focus purely on digital, right? And all of these questions should be answered in some type of project brief ahead of time. I have a link here to a project brief. So in the documents, you guys, if you want to download this later, you can see an example of a project brief and what that looks like. Really in this brief, when we start off, we want to start with our goals. So what we want to do is set what we call SMART goals, right? And most of you are probably familiar with these as you manage programs. But really, these are any type of specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goal. And particularly in digital, this is really important because how we define these goals will set up what we need to track and show as success metrics later on. And that information is really useful at the beginning of a campaign so that either your internal teams or if you're working with an external agency, they can make sure they craft those communications and things with the right links so that you can attribute back to your success metrics later on. But specific being, something like, hey, we want to reach 100 or 1 million people with a prep message by November 15th, instead of something like just raise awareness, right? And that way you can actually see, did we reach these goals? And your media people can plan to those goals specifically. We want to make sure that we're measuring everything, right? How many, how much, define what metrics we're going to use for that. And then we're going to talk about attainability a little later in relation to budget size. This is a common area where there's usually some expectation management needed, but we'll talk about how to make those really attainable or reasonable goals. And then obviously relevant and timely. Success metrics, as we start to lay these out, I've arranged these by goal. So if you are, if you wrote a grant or you received a grant that said, hey, you need to raise awareness. Okay, what are some success metrics that are actually measurable that fall under that? Things like reach, and reach is the number of people that would see your message. Impressions, right? The number of times your message was shown to someone or anyone, right? And then website traffic, right? Did you get clicks to a website property where you continued some type of education? There's also engagement metrics, things like video views, social media likes, comments, shares, reactions. Those are usually what we would refer to as more soft metrics. So we try to use those in addition to some other things. But they do demonstrate both awareness and sometimes can be used to help demonstrate education. And then conversion. And this is really the most important one to us and where most for-profit entities focus, right? And conversions could be considered the action you wanted someone to take. So it could be a click to call, right? Like if I'm trying to call to schedule an HIV appointment or a prep appointment or something like that, or a test. It could be filling out a form, right? It could be getting directions to a care facility through some type of locator, or initiating a live chat, or even scheduling a clinical visit if you work directly with an FQHC or a clinic of some kind. But all of these are, and ultimately what we try to measure in all of the campaigns that I run is some type of cost per conversion. So at the end of our campaign, or actually during, right, to optimize, we try to see, hey, how much are we spending to get someone to our website, to fill out the form we want them to fill out, or to schedule an appointment if that's our end goal, right? And we use that as our main barometer for success. So once we define what we want to do with our campaign, usually, and part and parcel of that is defining who we're going to be reaching out to, right? And when we start talking about this from a media perspective, we're really concerned with demographics, things like age, race, geographic location, education level, household income, marital status, those types of things. And most of this information can be found from looking at your surveillance data or through any of your epi contacts. And a lot of this is going to be written into the grants that you folks are receiving, or the funds that you received will have these kinds of things attached to them. Also, it's important to start to think about not only who they are numerically or from a demographic perspective, but also from kind of a psychographic perspective, or what are their behaviors, what are the things that, what are the things that motivate them to take action. Those can all help in crafting message, but also in identifying media channels, because you want to basically be thinking, okay, what types of media do these folks consume? I may be advertising in a very different type of media if I'm looking to reach 50 plus white men in MSM in Palm Springs versus, 18 to 25-year-old Latino MSM in Los Angeles, right? Very different media channels might work there. So it's important to kind of understand that and what they want and the types of media they consume. Thinking about what ads you're going to run. So how are we going to communicate this message to them is really important. And I could go on and on about how to develop, ads, but really in the work that I've been doing in the public health space, one of the things that we want to focus on is really starting to reutilize creative. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really, you want your ads to be relevant and compelling. And really there's been so much work, right, in testing campaigns, in prep campaigns, over the last 5 years, 10 years even, but mostly in the last 5, that there should be an existing campaign that you can leverage as an organization that will meet your goals and objectives. And we tested that out in a campaign I did with BHOC recently, and we'll talk about that a little later. But the CDC also has an extensive library of advertising that you can use for free. BHOC has built a clearinghouse on their website of a lot of ads that you should definitely, before you start planning, go check out to see if there's anything in there that you can use. Because really, at the end of the day, any dollar you can save on developing creative is a dollar you can spend on showing your ads to your target audience, right? And the only way people are going to take the actions that you want them to take is if they see a message. So, it's highly, highly, ineffective to go and create a new campaign every time you want to do something if it's been done before and it's available. So that's what I'll say about that for now. We'll come back to that point a little later. One of the things, so once you've got your goals and objectives and who you want to talk to, and you've picked creative that you think will do that job, next is trying to set your budget. So this can be done a number of different ways. And the first way we're going to talk about is setting your budget based on goal. So, we should always, if we already have a goal in mind, we can use past campaign success metrics as a way to project what our budget should be to reach certain goals. So by that, I mean, I had an example, Ultimed, a FQHC in Los Angeles, came to us way back when and said, hey, we want to get 15 people to schedule a prep appointment over a certain time period. So we looked at some of their data that we had from past campaigns, and we were able to project out that based on, our conversion rate, if we want to get 15 people, we knew our conversion rate was a little less than 0.1%. And we knew our cost per click was 25 cents a click. We knew we would need to get at least around 16,000 clicks, and that ultimately our budget would have to be around $4,100 in order to do that, right? And so using some of these metrics with a little bit of math, and I've created a spreadsheet that's available for all of you if you want to download it, where you can just plug in some of these numbers if you have them, and it'll spit out budgets based on equations, but will help us at least project up front. So we know, hey, if we want to get 15 people, we're probably going to need around $4,000 to do that. Do we have that kind of budget, or do we need to reassess, right? So once you got that, once you kind of set this budget, then, we want to start running ads, but we want to adjust according to actuals, right? These are projections. A lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is, we have certain funding cycles and we have to spend all of our money by a certain period. So we may be a little later in that than we want to be when we start running our ads, but we just set it and kind of forget it and then report at the end. And that can be problematic. So, it's important to kind of look and adjust as we go. And if you guys don't have any previous data from other campaigns, I've compiled some data in this deck from my previous experience that you guys can use as benchmarks to help you project later on. And we'll get to that here in a second. The other way to define your goals is to do, if you already have a budget, you actually define your goals based on the budget that you have allocated, right? So you go the other direction. And really here, we've already got a budget set aside. We need to think, okay, what are the realistic goals for this? We're going to use those same kind of metrics and just do the equation the other way to figure out, okay, can we realistically expect for these dollars in our DMA or in our marketplace? And so, for example, I've got here we often have really small or what are relatively small budgets and expect big, population level impacts. So one way to see if our expectations are aligned with our budget is to really use some of these equations. So at the end of the day, if we have $500 to raise awareness for an HIV outbreak amongst MSN in Augusta, Georgia, we're going to have to look at, okay, where can we get the biggest bang for that dollar? Right? And if we're just trying to raise awareness and we have no actual outcome that we're responsible for, then we want to look for something that's going to allow us to reach the largest number of people for the lowest cost, right? And we'll talk about that here a little more in detail. Whereas, and that's really, that type of goal, right? Reach, or showing my message to as many people as possible, is usually something we measure based on what's called CPM, or cost per thousand impression, right? So if your CPM is $1, it costs you $1 to show your message 1,000 times, right? That could be, one time to 1,000 people, or it could be 1,000 times to one person. But ultimately, we're going to show my ad 1,000 times for $1, right? That's how CPM kind of breaks down. Facebook may have a CPM of $12, right? Which means if our budget's $500, we can show our message to 41,000 people once, or 20,000 some odd people twice, right? And if we're going to require an action at the end of this, though, we're going to have to use some other success metrics. So it's really about aligning your budgets and your goals, right, to the proper channel. And I'll show you guys how to do that here. There is a principle, the law of diminishing returns, which fully applies to digital advertising and pretty much all advertising in general. But what that means is that there will come a point where you're going to spend a certain amount of money over a certain time frame, and you're actually going to be spending more to get something to do something than if you had spent less money and extended your time frame. So how do we figure this out, right? So the more ads you show, right, the more people are going to convert, but you might be paying more. And by that, I mean, there is an optimal frequency, or the optimal number of times you should show someone an ad to get them to convert. And that can be determined based on tracking, right? And so for one campaign we did, we saw that, we would actually show an ad to people up to 5 times. But after that point, after 5 times, and our cost per acquisition would go down until we hit that point. After that, we had to show people an ad 6 times or 7 times or 8 times to get them to take our action. We were paying significantly more for those conversions. So it made sense to set our frequency at 5, only show someone an ad 5 times per month, and then extend our campaign out further so that the next month we could get that same group again for less money. Right? And this is just something to keep in mind. If you have that ability to extend your campaign, it's better to do that than try to spend all your money in a small time frame. Because at the end of the day, you have to think about this like a pond with fish in it, right? Certain number of fish are only going to take 1 worm. Some fish, a little more fish might take 2 worms, 3 worms, 5 worms. But maybe you don't have enough worms to spend 5 worms to get 1 fish, right? So you got to kind of balance that. And really, we do this by tracking our cost per conversion throughout the process and optimizing. So I get this question all the time. What is the minimum budget to do something, right? And, just like how much does it cost to build a house? There's a lot of answers to that question, right? And none of them is one size fits all. But there are ways to determine what your minimum budget should be. And the first thing is to consider your target audience size and desirability. So online, everything is a competition. Unless you are buying very large amounts of money direct from a certain media channel, right? Like if I go directly to CNN.com and I say, hey, I want $100,000 worth of impressions or ads on your site over this period, they might give you a direct rate. The rest of the time, you're going to be bidding against other people for online ad inventory, right? And so depending on how big your audience is, larger audiences usually need more money, right, to saturate, because you're going to have to show a lot more ads to a larger number of people. But if your audience is really small and niche, then advertisers can charge a premium for that too. And so that size and desirability is a consideration. And also you have to think about your competition over seasonality, right? So for example, right now is an election year and holidays are coming up. So it's pretty much the most expensive time to buy advertising online, right? Versus, after back to school, right? It might be a lot cheaper, right? After the new year. So those are things to consider too. Also, one thing I have to bring up here is that a lot of us are on the same funding cycles. And so, if you know that you're in an area where there might be 3 other campaigns running to a similar target audience, you probably all don't want to run your ads at the same time, because you're all going to be bidding up the cost with each other, right, for a single target audience like MSM. And so that, some type of coordination can be helpful in controlling those cost aspects. Also, looking at the minimum budget, it depends heavily on your goals, what you want to achieve. And this breaks down a number of ways, but it's a lot easier and cheaper to get someone to do something online than it is in real life, right? So it's way easier for me to say, hey, I want 1,000 people to visit my website than I want 1,000 people to come into my clinic to take an HIV or an STD test or an HIV test, right? Like those types of things have to be taken into account. And ultimately, if you have any type of conversion metric from a past campaign, or if you want to use some from the ones I provide today, those metrics will be helpful in determining what that budget should be. So you're going to have to think about, what do I want them to do and how difficult is it for them to take that action, and incorporate that into your planning. So we've covered a lot. And if you guys have followed, you've gotten your goals, what you want your goals to be, you know who you're talking to, you have a rough idea of budget now. And so now we're going to say, okay, what is the media strategy I should employ based on those 3 things, right? And so if I want to raise awareness, right, I'm trying to maximize the number of people who see my message within the population. So I'm going to go for things that are more impression based. If I want to maximize engagement, I need to focus on reach and message relevancy, and then pick channels that actually allow people to engage, like social media, right? As opposed to just banner ads. And if I'm ultimately looking for conversion, I'm going to need to find the right, as we talked about, frequency until I reach that point of diminishing returns. And that's where that's more of that balancing act, because ultimately I don't want to pay just to show my message to people. I want to pay for people taking an action. And there are certain media channels that we'll go over in this next section that allow you to do that, whereas others don't. Some media channels only allow you to pay to show your ad to people. They don't allow you to pay for people filling out a form or calling or doing an action. And so it's important to know that up front. So minimum budget, we talked about that. And this is based on our goal and objective. What should our budget be? So here's an example, right, of different budgets by different goals. So here I have some numbers from an AIDS United campaign that we did last year about Google, Grindr, and Jacked direct costs. So right now, if I want to go and get someone, if I have $1,000 budget and I looked at these metrics, I could say, okay, with that $1,000, if I put all that in Google, I can get almost 500,000 impressions, right? And for that 446,000 impressions, I'm going to get almost 1,000 clicks to my website. But out of those clicks, I might only get about 5 people doing what I want them to actually do. So, and that cost per conversion, right? That 4.81 divided by, $1,000, my total budget divided by 4.81 means I'm going to be paying $207 on Google to get someone to do what I want them to do at the end of the day. Now, that if awareness is my metric, that might be the best channel, right? Because I'm going to get the most impressions for my money. But if conversion is my ultimate metric, there might be another channel. In this case, when you look at these down the line with cost and conversion, you can see, that type of thing plays out in Grindr versus Jacked, right? Grindr, I can get a lot of impressions, but if my numbers here hold true later on, I might actually get more conversions if I go with Jacked in this case, right? So that's how you have to kind of look at these numbers, or you can look at these numbers to help you decide on a channel to select. So once you've done all of your planning, right, or all of these plans, you need to think, okay, based on my success metrics, how am I going to evaluate whether or not I'm successful here, and how often, right? So this is usually a function of the amount of funds you have and resources you have over the period of time you want to run your campaign. So in that case, we really want to be setting regular intervals for tracking, and we want to be using a couple of basic tools. The first tool, most important digital tool, it's a free one, is Google Analytics. So your websites should have Google Analytics on them, and ultimately you should be running some type of tag on all of your communications, whether they're emails or Facebook ads or even digital banners and display banners or search ads. All of these things should have something in them that identifies them as a source, right? And you can set all this up through Google Analytics for free. So every digital campaign should have these. It starts out living on your website, and it's a little piece of code you put on there, so it tracks everyone who comes there. And if anyone isn't familiar with this, there's a lot of info online about it. But ultimately what it allows you to do too is if you pair it with something else, also free, called Google Tag Manager, you can add little snippets to all the links that tell you where those people came from and then what action they took once they got to your site. So for example, I can set up a tag that says, bhoc.com/UTM equals Facebook. So I know, oh, that UTM code is for Facebook. So anyone who came to my site and did stuff came from my Facebook ad. And in that way, you can start to say, okay, do my advertising on this channel actually drive the conversion I wanted? Or which channels drove the most conversions? You can also set up other tags on your site to help you do things like retarget people. Now, not every organization, depending on the content of your website, will be allowed to retarget. But if you are allowed to do so, because you are not very specifically focused on one type of disease or ailment, then it's highly recommended. So the other platforms, so any online platform probably has its own tracking mechanism too. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, they all have their own platforms for tracking ads and things like that too. So in addition to these first two, which I recommend everyone use all the time, regardless of where they run, there's probably a platform specific tracking dashboard that you can be looking into to get information on how people are consuming your ads and the actions they're taking. So, but that varies based on tool. I highly recommend, if you can, to do weekly kind of check-ins or evaluations and monthly reporting when you're running your media, because that way you'll be able to see trends. So things like, oh, okay, my Google ads are doing really well, but my cost per conversion seems to be going up. Why is that, right? Oh, maybe I'm spending too much this week. Let me try lowering my spend next week to see if I hit that optimal frequency, right? Things like that. You can make little adjustments that at the end of the month, you find out made a big difference. Because if you tend to wait until the end of a month, all of a sudden you've spent a big chunk of your media budget, right? You could have spent, if it's a 3-month campaign, you've already spent a third of your dollars and now you're trying to fix it. Tends to be better if you fix it during that process. But this is going to be purely based on the resources you have available, right? We all only have so much time in a day. And if you've hired an agency to do this for you, doing all of these weekly check-ins might cost you more. So something you have to balance, but that's the recommendation. That was a lot. So I'm going to take a little break here. Why don't we do 5 minutes for questions? We're at 12:30 now. So
Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah.
It is 3:30 in California. Thank you so much for that. I have one question, and I think it would be great if we can try to answer it in about 3 minutes so we can stay. I know you have so much amazing content. The question is, can you talk briefly about no-cost options? So we know there are many different options that folks can do for free. Can you just take a couple minutes to talk about that?
Absolutely. And that's interesting. So the idea of a no cost option though is kind of a misconception, because ultimately let's say Facebook, right? And we usually refer to that as what we would either call owned or earned media instead of paid media, right? Paid media, I'm paying for that placement. Owned media, like my Facebook channel, I can go post things there all day long, but I still have to have a resource who I'm giving some amount of time to go do all of that, right? But you can get the same metrics through Facebook posting, for example, that you can get anywhere else. So you should still be using Google Analytics on your site. You should still be putting tracking mechanisms there, but you can do organic posting and then try to reach out to other organizations, right? Facebook, Instagram, even Twitter, to help then promote those messages too. So that's one way to do owned media. Another part of that is earned media. So earned can be PR, right? Maybe you have a big initiative launching. You can be doing press releases and those types of things to other media organizations to try to get coverage. A lot of times though, that is a significant amount of effort with no guaranteed return, right? Because you're going to be what we call pitching those news organizations and things to write stories about you without any knowledge of whether or not they're actually going to do it. But if you have someone on your staff who that's their job, then great. They should definitely be doing that in addition to any type of paid advertising. And you should be using kind of the same tracking mechanisms. So for any of those things like a Facebook post, etc., if you put tracking parameters on them, you can track how many people they sent to your website and then what actions those people took, and then ultimately create, right, a cost per conversion out of that. So, you know, head count, right? If you've got one person dedicated to running your social media, how much did that person cost, right? An overhead divided by the number of conversions they got is cost per your conversion in that free channel, right? Or no cost channel. But does that kind of answer that question for you? You want me to go into more depth there? I'm trying to watch.
I think that was great. Yeah, I think we want to move forward in terms of time. Thanks so much, Matt.
Cool. Okay. So we're going to talk about media channels here next, right? And the right media channel will allow you to reach your priority population with a compelling message while they're willing to receive it and at a reasonable cost, right? Those are really the three kind of ways of determining what channel we should use. From a digital media perspective, there are a ton of channels, but I'm going to focus on what we've seen as kind of the big three when it comes to MSM. First one being Google Display Network, which will allow you to run ads across millions of websites and apps based on user or audience information. Facebook and Instagram, which obviously allow us to run ads on those two popular social networks. And it's one dashboard because Facebook owns Instagram. And then last but not least, dating apps. Particularly with MSM, and there's a lot of them, right? Grindr, Adam for Adam, Hornet, Scruff, Jacked. I mean, who can keep count of them all or track of them all? But they're all kind of similar, and they're all very effective at reaching MSM audiences because they are the only channels that are exclusively or almost exclusively MSM. So if you're running on these channels, you have basically what we call zero media waste. You're not paying to show your ad to the wrong type of person if you're looking to reach MSM in these channels. So selecting a channel based on goals. We talked a little bit about this before, right? I'm going to reiterate it here. We should really be, if we want a very high awareness, we're going to be looking for the channel with the lowest cost per thousand or the lowest CPM. If we want conversion or them to take an action, we want to look for the channel that has the lowest cost per conversion, right? And so here are some more metrics here that I've provided based on real campaigns that I've run in the past and what the cost per conversions were. And then I've created, if you want to click this link, there is a spreadsheet that you guys can download and then edit to your heart's content. just fill in. If you know, like if you've run campaigns in the past and you have click-through rates and you have some type of, and you have a budget, it'll spit out cost per conversion, or it'll spit out some of these numbers and help you. But at the end of the day, again, it's all really based on data. And so it's really, really helpful if everyone in this space starts sharing that data with each other, right? So I would encourage you folks that as you guys are as you guys run campaigns, either share them with other organizations in your area or provide them to CDPH so that they can then share them with other organizations, right? So when you're doing your reporting and your recaps, it's really helpful to try to track. And if we can all try to track the same metrics, that would be really helpful. So there's a bunch of them in this deck that I highly recommend. Things like cost per impression, click-through rate, cost per click, conversion rate, and cost per conversion. So that's how these break down. So we also want to select a triangle based on audience, right? And we talked about that earlier, knowing the type of media that they consume. And really, the dating apps are by far going to be the simplest way because they really only target that audience. Whereas things like Facebook and Google, there is no magic MSM button, right? Where I check this box and I only show my ads to MSM. So you have to do a lot more work to make sure you're showing your ads to the right people there. But that because you're putting in that effort, they don't charge as high a premium to show your ads. So there's a balance there. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of both of those a little more later. But most digital advertising agencies that have reasonable capabilities should be able to target MSM on Google and Facebook using different types of keywords and different websites. And I know BHOC has compiled a list of keywords based on campaigns that myself and others have run in the past that can help you do that. And those are available at the end of this in the resources section and on BHOC's website. But really, there's different ways to do this. But ultimately, if you're going to try to engage an outside agency like myself or anyone else to buy media on your behalf, you probably want a larger budget because you're going to pay them in fees. Every dollar you pay them in fees, right, is a dollar you can't spend showing your ads to people, just like creating the creative, right, and those things. So, if there's any way you can pool resources or if you can try to do this yourself, that can be the most cost efficient way to start out. But later on, if you have larger budgets, it does make sense to think about engaging an agency because they might be able to actually save you money by doing all the optimization and the right targeting later. But let's talk about channels. So Google, I'm going to start there and we're going to get into this. So Google Display Network, right? This gives you access to the most number of people on the internet of any channel. Because it allows you to run ads on many, many, many different websites through one advertising platform. Google offers you the widest variety of targeting parameters. So by that, I mean, everything that we talked about earlier from demographics, but also starting to look at different psychographics. Like, is this person in market for a wedding ring? Are they in market to buy a car? Are they in market to buy furniture? Are they single? Are they married, right? Do they show different propensities? Are they index higher to be interested in fashion and fitness? Those types of things. All of that you can buy through Google and actually use as targeting parameters. So it allows you to build a very, very specific profile that can help you narrow in on MSM in particular. Google also allows you to pay for ads a bunch of different ways, right? They'll allow you to pay for the number of impressions or CPM. They'll allow you to pay based on clicks, right? They'll even allow you to pay based on conversion, right? So if you say, hey, I'm willing to pay $1.25 per person that fills out this form, you can buy ads on Google that way. You cannot buy ads that way on Grindr or even on Facebook, for example. So those are very, very, those are very helpful for different advertisers depending on your level of tracking, attribution, and ultimately, data that you're able to collect and take action on. Because of its vast reach and highly customizable targeting parameters, Google can be one of the most efficient and effective digital advertising channels for marketers that know how to use it. Because with all of those options comes increased complexity, right? So it is definitely harder because you have to try to define your target audience properly and then keep tweaking that audience to make sure you're reaching the right people, versus something like Grindr, where you just show an ad there, it's all MSM. You're pretty much in your target audience, right? So I talked a little bit about these already, but two things that I want to hit on targeting metrics here are affinity and custom affinity groups. So that means you can show your ad to people based on interests like foodies and health buffs, but custom affinity means you can create your own audiences. So for example, if you use Google Analytics on your own website, you can actually retarget people or build what we call lookalike audiences. So Google will have an audience built for you that you can say lookalike, and they will basically create profiles based on the people who come to your website and then show your ads to people who meet that behavioral criteria, but just haven't been to your website yet. So that's very interesting, and I highly recommend that. And then if you can't retarget, that's like the next best thing. And then you can also build your own custom audiences based on like email lists and other things. So if you have any user information, you can upload that and Google will find people, create profiles and find people who look like them online as well. Part of that lookalike audience mechanism. So that's really important. And then retargeting. I talked about that earlier. Retargeting means you're going to show ads only to that audience of people who has already been to your website at least one time. This is always the most cost-efficient way to get conversions, because you are literally going back and reminding people who have already raised their hand by clicking and said, hey, I'm interested in your thing enough to click, right? But maybe I didn't take the action you wanted me to take. So it's much better to spend your money showing that person an ad versus trying to convince someone who you don't know if they're even interested or not to be interested in taking action. So when available, highly recommend retargeting. There are two different ways. Well, two different ways to buy ads on Google. All right, through Google, you can use Google ads.google.com. Just use Google Ads to buy display network ads or search ads on your own, or you can do something that's called programmatic buying. Now, programmatic buying is really only for people who have more than 25 grand a month to spend on advertising, or those who can partner with an agency that's already running programmatic for others and just kind of piggyback on their access. And really what programmatic does is it allows you to do all of the same bidding and buying techniques that Google allows, but on other platforms like Grindr, for example, or Adam for Adam, or any app, or well, not any, but a lot of different apps, a lot of websites, a lot of things. You can then bid and buy through Google DV360, which is their platform. This is by far the most efficient and effective way I have found to do any type of online advertising is programmatic. It gives you increased targeting parameters. It gives you better placements. Placements are where you can run your ads, gives you access to more of those, and better tracking capabilities. But you do need a larger budget or to partner. And if you were trying to do this yourself, it is even more complex than using Google Ads, right? With great targeting capabilities comes great complexity, unfortunately. So the downside to Google is its complexity. The upside is its cost effectiveness and its reach. Facebook. So this is a big one. And when I talk about Facebook, I'm talking about Facebook and Instagram together or synonymously. It also gives you access to millions of people. These are by far the most popular social networks. Facebook does allow you to hone in a little more. They do have an LGBTQ type of audience already kind of made for you. But note that doesn't mean that all the people you're reaching are LGBTQ. It just means that they have been shown to be friendly to those types of messages and audiences. But again, Facebook gives you a lot of ways to target. They do let you buy ads on a number of different mechanisms, not quite as many as Google will allow you to do, but you can pay for things besides just impressions, which is really nice. And their behavioral targeting helps a lot too. And by that, I mean, you can go into Facebook and say, hey, I want to target people who are fans of these types of profiles or these types of causes. In Instagram, you can target people who like certain types of hashtags, right? That way you can start to build what you can consider to be a more likely MSM audience, right? If you base this on things that other MSM are doing, and then you can use trial and error to really hone that audience to see okay, well, when I targeted, Pride, right, that went really well. But when I targeted, you know, Project Runway, I got too much media waste, right? So I'm going to eliminate that and do this other one. And that's reductive, but I'm just using these as examples, right? So I hope I'm not offending. But in media, that's really what we need to do, right? We're trying to tweak. We're trying to find out how can we possibly make this audience as relevant a target audience as possible so that I get the lowest cost per conversion later on. Next on here is dating apps. Now, again, I mentioned these earlier. There's a lot of them. I'm going to focus on Grindr because in all of the ads that I've run and all the campaigns we've done, Grindr has by far the largest reach, and they're the most cost efficient. So when we talk about these, I'm going to be focusing on that, but there are lots of others, right? Like Jacked, Adam for Adam, Hornet, etc. The main strength of these is that you are guaranteed to reach MSM. The one downside is that they charge a lot more money to do that because they know they have a very defined niche audience and a direct channel to them. So, that's a concern. They also only allow you to target based on location, right? You can only buy impressions and you can only target based on location. So you're pretty much going zip code or jurisdictional level, and that's kind of it. So if you're trying to do, for example, MSM of color, and even certain, ethnicities which within MSM, it's going to be very difficult here to do that type of targeting. Whereas Facebook and Google, while they won't let you directly click a button and target ethnicity based on different behavioral factors, you can help hone that in more, right, on those channels than here. So questions about the media channels before I move on to other fun things like the campaign we did and other success metrics and more how to.
Matt, you're doing great. I'm doing a quick time check. We're at 3:47, so I think we're pretty good to get through that last piece and also have some time for Q&A. There is one question in this brief moment about geofencing. Are you able to talk for a moment or two about geofencing?
Sure. So geofencing, yes, you can do that on Google's platform and on Facebook. You can do geofencing on apps through Google Programmatic as well, but you can't do it, you can't really do it direct through app. But what you can do is, like I said, you can do based on geography, right? So you can technically create little fences around zip codes and things like that if you want. But what I would say is this: a lot of times when we're doing these campaigns, it makes sense to geofence if we are trying to only hit people who are taking advantage, like coming to a certain clinic or doing those types of things. But what we found is that there are big migratory patterns, if you will, with MSM. It particularly depends on what kind of audiences we're reaching to. And I'll give you an example. So in Palm Springs, right, Latinx MSM were actually more likely to visit clinics that weren't right in their area because they might have been afraid that they were going to see other people in those clinics that knew them, right? And so they would actually travel 5, 7, 10 miles to go to a different clinic that wasn't right in their backyard. So it can be a double-edged sword. It kind of depends on what you're looking to do. And I would say that overall, depending on the premium that a platform is charging to do that geofencing, it may or may not be worth it at the end of the day. I have seen a lot of success with geofencing, particularly with home builders. And I know that doesn't apply to you guys, but for something we did with KB Home, we basically geofenced all of their competitors' sales offices. And so when people went into those, we then hit them with ads later on. And that worked really well. So if you were thinking about trying to use this as a mechanism to identify traffic, for example, geofencing a lot of different night spots that MSM might be headed to, that might be a way to build an audience. So that's kind of as far as I would go there. Does that help?
Matt, there's a quick clarifying question about whether there's a difference between geofencing and geotargeting.
Yes. So I think, can you guys still hear me, Jen? Okay, cool.
Yep, we can.
Sorry, just cut you off at the end there. But yeah, so there is a difference between geofencing. Geofencing means that a user has entered that geofence at one point or that they are still in that fence. geo-targeting means that's where they always are, right? So you're only going to be running ads when someone is there. A geofence, you can tag someone and then they could leave again, and then you can hit them up. But if I'm only targeting based on geography, I'm only running ads in a certain zip code. As soon as that person leaves that zip code, I'm not hitting them anymore, unless I'm retargeting them with some other means, right? Does that make sense? So in geofencing, you can use two mechanisms for geofencing. One is they're in that location now, or they've been to that location in a certain period of time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when we start talking about what we just did with BHOC and how does this apply in the real world? So we just ran a program with a campaign, 4 different digital campaigns in 6 different counties in California. And we looked at, okay, what is most cost effective when we're purchasing direct versus programmatic, and then from a channel perspective, right? And so all we bought were ads on dating apps. So Grindr, Jacked, etc. And we did that 2 ways. 1, we went directly to the app and we bought ads from them. And 2, we went from a programmatic through Google's programmatic platform and bought ads on the same apps to the same exact audiences. And we ran ads and we tried to see, okay, number 1, right? Which of these channels is going to be most efficient and effective? Is it direct or programmatic? Number 2, which actual app gives us the most bang for a buck? And then number 3, right? Which of these is going to be most effective from a creative perspective? So really, those were our objectives. We wanted to raise awareness for HIV modalities in these counties, but we wanted to track these 3 different things, right? Direct versus programmatic, which apps were going to be better than others, and which creative, if any, would be better than the other creative. And really this last point was just to see if we could use creative from other areas that came from New York or that came from the CDC in very specific areas in California, and see if it would be as effective as creative that came from those areas, right? Because we've heard a lot of pushback in the past, or at least I have, that if that ad doesn't reflect MSM in my jurisdiction exactly, it's not going to be effective, right? And I've heard this from both sides and the middle of the country. Everywhere I go, I hear this argument, right? And so we wanted to test that out too. At the end of the day, our key performance indicator or KPIs were impressions, right? Cost per thousand. How much did we pay to show our ads? Cost per thousand. Clicks and click-through rate and cost per click. Number of uses of our service locator. And those ultimately, we call those CPL, or cost per lead. A lead is like a conversion. We just use CPC too many times. It gets confusing with cost per click. So we changed that to CPL here. And then we also tracked live chats and downloads of information on PrEP assistance or HIV assistance, CDAP or ADAP in California. And so all those things were our leads or our conversions. The 4 different pieces of creative we ran were, we ran 2 PrEP campaigns and 2 U=U campaigns. The first one was from the Center of Disease Control, Start Talking, Stop HIV. The second PrEP ad was from the New York City Department of Public Health, and it was this Play Sure campaign. And I think this one was from like 2016 or 2015 even. So not only was it from New York, but it was old and from New York, and we're running it in California. And then the U=U, we did I Became Untransmittable. This was from the Santa Clara County Department of Public Health. And then we ran I Can't Transmit HIV and that was from New York City. And the way we got to these was we basically put a call out for ads that we could use from all different types of health organizations. And then we worked with them to make sure we were allowed to use them and create their content. And we did a review session with the 6 agencies or the 6 jurisdictions we were running from. And these were the 4 that everyone kind of agreed, yeah, we can run those in our jurisdiction without ruffling any feathers. So go right ahead. So what did we learn? We learned that programmatic was more effective than direct, and significantly so. All the media we purchased programmatically, we were able to serve 10 times more impression per dollar. We also drove 3 times more clicks per dollar, and we were able to drive 3 times more lead action per dollar. right? So it was a pretty significant difference. And that means I ran ads on Grindr through Google first. That was programmatic versus just buying ads straight from Grindr, right? Some benchmarks that we established with this that you folks can use in your jurisdictions or whenever you folks are planning were a CPM basis. If you're doing programmatic buying, the benchmark is really about $1 CPM. And if you're doing direct, you can expect to pay $10 through any app. And that's like an average between Grindr and Jacked and Hornet and Scruffed and all the other ones we bought on. I can tell you that by far, Grindr was the cheapest one to actually run your ads on. So if you are thinking of an app, I'd recommend Grindr. And that's regardless of whether you're doing programmatic or direct. But if you want to get one click, you should be estimating about 25 cents to get that click, or 75 cents, depending on how you're buying your media. If you want them to read an article or down, like if we want them to do prep app, right? And we had that one sheet on how to apply and what it takes. You're looking at probably between $30 and $90 to get that type of action on your site. And that's to read or download some type of article. If you want to get them to use your service locator, like find services in my area, enter your zip code, it's about between $111 and $333, depending on whether you're buying programmatic or directly. If you want them to do a live chat, we found that was really expensive. Not a lot of these people want to do a live chat, unfortunately. It's probably around $1,000 to almost $2,700, right? And ultimately, there were successful live chats, which means someone had a live chat and then actually navigated them to services. And in this case, it was almost $2,000 to $5,000 there, which is high. So just to keep in mind. And so how would you use these budgets, right? So if you had a 10K budget, you could basically go, okay, with $10,000, right, and $1 cost per click, I can probably get, or $1 cost per 1,000 impressions, right? I can get 10 million impressions for $10,000, or 40,000 clicks, or 435 people to take the action that I want. If I go programmatically, if I go direct, I can expect to only get 1 million impressions, 13,333 clicks, and probably 145 conversions, right? So other benchmarks that we have from past campaigns, right? And this isn't what I ran with BHOC, but this would be helpful because these are very different. So something we do with the department, with Desert AIDS Project, right? We know if you want someone to call you from a website or a campaign, you're probably going to be paying about $788 if you're buying that media directly. If you buy it programmatically, you're going to be paying like $263 just to get someone to pick up a phone and call your clinic, right? Through digital media. If you want them to fill out a form, and in this case, the form was, hey, sign up for an appointment to get an HIV test or an STD test, right? HIV, STD, we're doing both. It's probably closer to $1,000, $1,500 on on direct buy media than it is to do programmatic, which is about $525. And if you want them to actually come into your location and do a prep consult, we saw these were actually cheaper than getting them to sign up immediately, which was, hey, just come in, it's free, it's no cost. We were able to get them to come into the clinic for $407 a person, but programmatically $136. And then scheduling an appointment, an in-person appointment was along those lines too, about $409. There was pretty even take rate. We had like a 96% of people who scheduled online actually came in for that prep appointment versus testing, which was a much higher threshold, unfortunately. But those are some numbers you guys can use. So if you're doing this, right, like let's say you know, hey, I want to get 100 people to come in and to schedule a prep appointment. Great. You're going to take that $100 and multiply it by the cost per conversion here, the benchmark. So $407 per lead. You're going to need about 40 grand, right, to get 100 people to come in and do this prep consult. So that's how you can use them. Other campaign benchmarks, and I broke these down by jurisdiction in case we have anyone on here who's like, well, I'm in Alameda. What should I be using as my benchmark, right? Here they are. These were the 6 jurisdictions we ran in. Here's the benchmarks you can expect, either direct on Grindr or programmatically on Grindr, right? And how you can use these. So if you're trying to get 100 MSM in Fresno to locate prep services, you should be planning on spending around $7,500 to $8,000 to get that to happen if you're buying ads on Grindr, right? So that's how these numbers can be used to help. And we'll make all these available to you after the fact, right? So one point, we also know that using existing creative is much, much more effective than going out and creating your own. And here's why. Like I said earlier, any dollar you spend is a dollar you cannot spend showing your ad to someone. So if you have to go spend $50,000 to create a campaign, that's $50,000 less in media you can spend, which in this case would have been a third of our conversions. So we would have only converted 4,824 people if we hadn't used existing creative. We also saw zero statistical difference or statistically significant difference between the ads that we were running from other counties. In fact, that Play Sure campaign ad that we ran that was 3 years old from New York was the best performing ad in any of our jurisdictions in California, right? So even better than the Santa Clara ad was in, you know, Alameda and Contra Costa and other counties in that area, right? Now, that can be from a number of different reasons, right? Very clear call to action is very important, right? Very clear message, right? Good. Fun, more playful, not as serious, also helpful. But at the end of the day, like I said, it wasn't so much more of a difference where we were getting 3, 4, 5 times as many people converting, where it would have made sense to go develop our own creative, right? Does that make sense? Because you're gambling. Whenever you develop your own creative, you're going, I'm going to gamble that the money I'm spending on creative development is going to make me such better ads that it will exceed the results I could get from spending that money on media. So when we did purchase programmatically, all of our existing campaigns can be as effective or more effective than new creative. And we compared these to things where we did new creative, right? My agency developed all new campaigns for Ultimate and Desert AIDS Project. And we thought they were really good and that they worked really well. But at the end of the day, the money we spent there just didn't justify if we had picked up the CDC's campaigns and run it to way more people, right? And so I broke that down here from a cost per impression, cost per click, and cost per lead. I mean, you can just see with BHOC, our cost per lead was $27 using existing creative, even though we did direct and had $169 cost per lead with Ultimate and a $223 cost per lead with Desert AIDS Project. Once we incorporate all those costs, right, of creative development, et cetera. So 2 different ways to break it down. Now I wanted to help you guys with, well, any questions, sorry, on the BHOC campaign before I go into media planning examples with limited budgets. Nope. Jen, you on mute?
Sorry. Yep. There are no questions specific to that right now. It would be
Okay.
great to continue. You're doing excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. So media example. So plan A, right? I just want to generate awareness. I hear this all the time. And so in this case, you know, we want to raise awareness for PrEP in MSM in Augusta, Georgia. Actual thing, AIDS United, we did with AIDS United for the last 2 years now. So let's say you have a budget of $1,000. Okay, great. We're going to define our success metrics, right? And because we're only trying to raise awareness, we want impressions and we want clicks to our website and then maybe service locator usage, right? And we're going to track all of these things, but we're going to focus our campaign on impressions because, you know, we know that raising awareness is key. When we look at digital media channels, in this case, we're going to look at Grindr, right? Because we know they're guaranteed to reach our target audience of MSM with zero waste. And it's not complicated. I just go to Grindr self-serve ad platform, plug in the zip codes I want and my budget and hit OK and I'm running ads, right? Upload my media and I'm running ads. So very simple. So we know this, and based on our benchmarks, we can take that $1,000 budget and we can project ahead of time what we think we're going to get. So in this case, we know that our cost per 1,000 on Grindr when we're buying direct is about $4.07. So we can expect to get 245,700 impressions. We know that our previous click-through rates were about 1.35%, which is going to net us, you know, 3,317 clicks when you times 245, 700 by 1.35%. And then that's ultimately going to give us a cost per click of around 30 cents, right? We know that. So this is what we can project that we're going to get. You know, and with our estimated population, so when we look in this area, we can estimate in Augusta, Georgia, that there are about 5,000 MSM. We're not going to reach all 5,000 of those guys just by doing Grindr, right? But we know that there's an audience of about 5,000. So at that case, we would be, and these prices with this number of impressions, right? We'd pretty much be able to reach every member of our audience 50 times over the duration of our campaign with this size of a budget through Grindr, right? And that could be, you know, very condensed. We could do, you know, 10 times per week for 5 weeks, or we could spread it out and do 5 times a week for 10 weeks, right? Or et cetera. It depends on what our timing and objectives are. But if we want, you know, and from an awareness perspective, right, it's not really going to matter because we're going to show the impressions. But ultimately, anytime you have an advertising campaign, if you can do it, the longer you run that campaign, the better, right? It's better to space your budgets out over a longer period than try to spend them in a shorter period. You're always going to get better results. So that's the recommend. If you can afford to take the time, take it. You know, this, by running on one single media channel, you also lower your creative expenses, because any channel that you run on has different size requirements, right? So, you know, you're going to have to create different sized ads and different specs and then upload them. And that may cost you some more money. So running on a single channel can make that more efficient. It also makes it way easier to track because you've only got one channel. You don't have to figure out whether this person came from Facebook, Instagram, Google Display, or Grindr. They all came from Grindr. You're only on Grindr, right? So that's a way to simplify things. And if you have a limited budget, I do recommend focusing more of your media spend and then maybe taking advantage with some in-house resources, some of those other free, you know, owned or earned channels that we talked about a little earlier. Media plan example B, right? This is if you want to get a little more adventurous with your $1,000 and want to try to tackle Google and Facebook to try to see if you can get better results, right, on those two channels. Because like I said earlier, while they are more complex, they are always cheaper because you have to do more work in building your audience. But same success metrics: impressions, clicks to the website, service locator usage, except this time we're on 2 different channels. So this one is a little more complex. Like I said, you're gonna have to build your audience. So how do we do that? So you know, we've found that, you know, from past CDC and Emory data that, you know, the different populations, it's around, you know, it's around 20% of the male population is going to be MSM. So we use these to kind of create an MSM population projection, right? If 48.9% of our population is male, and then, you know, 20% of them are MSM, we can get to some numbers for Augusta, Georgia. Then we know, okay, if that's the total number of people in this area, or the approximate number of guys, how many times do I want to hit them, right? That's my frequency, and over what period. So I have to take the number of ads I want to show them and multiply it by the period. So in that case, I'm going to get, in this top one, I would get either 18.9 or 18 total frequency, right? And if I want to cover my area, because I know I'm going to waste on Google and Facebook, I'm always going to show my ads to people who aren't MSM. So I'm going to account for like a 30% waste. So I'm going to times my population by 130%, right? Because 30% of it might not hit who I want to hit. Then I'll get a total number of impressions that I need to be working with. And so then I can start using my CPM number times those impressions to get estimated cost, right? And when I apply my click-through rate, I can then find out, okay, this is how many clicks I'm probably going to get based on these budgets. So I've worked out here, this is a $994 budget, and you're going to get, you know, 230,000 impressions, right? Versus when we were going with the other campaign, I'm probably going to get, you know, for this one, I could get 245,000 impressions, right? So it could come out in the wash. It might be different, depends on your target audience and where you're going, right? So these are all And then what you're going to do is you're going to use these planning mechanisms. Then you're going to start running, and you're going to see if it actually proves true or not, right? And adjust accordingly. Because just because you got these prices last year in your campaign doesn't mean you're going to get them again, right? Things may have changed. You may be running in a more competitive time, et cetera. So try to adjust accordingly as you run these over the course of that period. But both of these types of calculators are available in the resources section. So you can literally just click them, download the spreadsheets, plug in your population number for your county, and it'll spit out about how much MSM you could have in there, with a high and a low kind of estimate number, et cetera. But really, so today we talked about a lot, and I'm almost out of time here. I want to save some time for questions. So the key takeaways are: one, planning is key. You got to plan, right? And it requires data to plan and project your outcomes accurately. So please, 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 let's all share our data. And I'll share my data with you guys whenever you want. So download this deck. If you have other questions, email me directly. And if I have information about your specific jurisdiction, I'm happy to send it to you, right? Two, every dollar you spend on creative development is another dollar you cannot spend showing ads. So, if we could save money there and use existing creative and share our creative with one another when we have done it, that would help everyone. Three, dating apps are going to be by far the easiest way for you to reach MSM, but they may not be the most efficient from a cost perspective, depending on your capabilities to target on the other channels, right? Google and Facebook will always be cheaper than dating apps, but they'll require a lot more time and effort to manage and do from a paid perspective, right? From an owned or earned perspective, all day. Highly recommend whatever you're doing. If you're doing a paid campaign, put those things on Facebook and Instagram for free too, right? Nothing should be holding you back there. Just track it, give it a special tracking code, right? And compared to your other paid ads. So then you can compare how they're working together. Four, smaller budgets are fine if you want to go build awareness. But if you want people to take actions, you're probably going to need bigger budgets, right? $1,000 can show your ad to a lot of people, but it's probably only going to get very few people to do something, right? Like 5, 10. So yeah, manage expectations there. Lots and lots of organizations have done this same exact work, right? We all get funding every year for the same things to the same populations, basically. Let's share, right? The more we share, the better. Reach out. There are probably people just north or just south of you who have done the exact same thing very, very recently. They may have creative. They may have stock photography. They may have all kinds of assets that were funded by public money, and they might be more willing to share it with you than you think. I would highly recommend going to BHOC's clearinghouse, because we've got at least, 80 campaigns now that span, PrEP, HIV, testing, U equals U, et cetera. Go look, download, used, right? It's free. And last but not least, if you can afford to do it, highly recommend considering programmatic. It's going to get you between 3 to 10 times more results for your money. And it sounds expensive, but if, 3 or 4 jurisdictions can get together and run, to a more generic website with the same creative, you guys could probably be getting a lot more bang for your buck, right? So that is where I will end it. Now I know we're going to have more questions.
Matt, thank you so much for that terrific presentation and covering tons of material. And I also just want to repeat that all of this, including the recording, will be on our site. So don't feel panicked if you didn't get everything out of it. But thank you, Matt. We are going to get questions, but get 2 questions. But before we do that, Tony Taylor is going to go over just briefly our clearinghouse. Make sure you all know about the resource. So Tony, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick plug about the BHOC Advertising Clearinghouse, which is an open source digital library of public health campaigns. And this is intended for public health organizations to use and save on production costs. Many public health organizations around the country are creating their own ad campaigns and placing them online. But however, most of them have small budgets, as many of you here know, which keeps those organizations from designing and placing effective ads. So we've created an online clearinghouse and are collecting ads designed by agencies, which they are willing to share. Some of them require permission to use, but that's all outlined in the clearinghouse. We also include any information that they have about their formative or outcome evaluations. So if your organization has created relevant campaigns that we can include on the clearinghouse, please share them. And I definitely recommend that you all check out the clearinghouse as well. And that's it. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Matt, I know there's some questions and I think Jen's been keeping track of them.
Yeah, we have a few more questions here for you. So one question has to do with, can you talk a little bit more about the benefits that come with extending a campaign over time?
Sure. So think of it this way, right? You've got you're skimming the cream off your crop every month, right? Or the cream of your crop off the top every month. So if you try to run your campaign in a single month, right, you're only going to get so many conversions, right? And particularly, let's use a very specific example. Getting MSM to come in and get tested, right? Only so many people are going to convert over that month period, right? They may have a scare. They may have some kind of event in their life, right? It's going to be super relevant to a certain number of people up to a certain point. So, and then you're going to basically saturate your market with that message for that month, right? If you run another month, you're going to give your population time to replenish. More people might come into that market. So for example, just because I didn't get to go in and take a test this month doesn't mean next month I may not be ready to based on my life circumstance, right? And so the longer you can extend, the longer you can keep your message in market, the more likely it is to be relevant to more people, because that relevancy is based on so many other things, right, that are going on in their lives. And if you're not still there reminding them over a longer period, you're not going to get them to do what you want them to do. So we talked about optimal frequency. If I spent $1,000 in 1 month, I would probably be, I would definitely be paying to get people to show someone more ads over that period than if I had spaced it out, 500 this month, 500 next month. I'm going to get better results, because instead of spending that second $500 and only getting, let's say 10 conversions, right? Let's say the first 500 got me 20 conversions, but the second $500 only got me 10. So I got a total of 30. Well, if the first 500 a month always gets me 20 conversions, if I run another month, I'm going to get 40 for the $1,000 instead of only 30, right? Because that last 10 conversions is going to cost me more than the first 20 in the same period of time, because I've already taken out those people from my audience that were most likely to convert. Now I'm spending more to convert people that are harder to convert. Whereas if I wait and let that audience replenish with easy to convert people another month, I'm going to pay less. I know it's complicated. That's kind of simple. Yeah.
Matt, just to clarify, what I think you're saying is that it actually helps to run ads, take a break and run ads. Is that a good summary, or would you say it differently than that?
I mean, if you are trying to get the most for your money, yes, it definitely helps to identify, right, where that point is in conversion, in cost per conversion. And as soon as you see your cost per conversion start going up to a point that you feel uncomfortable, stop running your ads that month, and then wait and start again next month and track again, right? That's how I would say it.
Perfect.
And if you can afford to, and we saw this play out, Jen, in our own campaign we just did, we had an unexpected interruption from Grindr shutting down their ad platform for I think it was almost 3 months, right? And so we shut down in the middle of one of our U=U campaigns. And that when we could, because it gave all that 3.5 months for guys to come back online and get back into that mode, when we started running again, that campaign had a significantly higher success rate and conversion rate for lower dollars than the U=U campaign that we ran just all the way through, right? And so that's a case in point of taking that break can help reload your audience.
I have another question, and this may be for Matt, but it also may be for Tony. The question is, do any of the apps have a not-for-profit discount?
So yes, well, let me rephrase that. It's possible, and depending on your relationship with them, it can vary. But I'll let Tony take that more so. Tony, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a dating app inventory that we're tracking at BHOC here that outlines any apps that do allow discounts for nonprofits. So if there is interest in learning more about that, I'm happy to connect offline if you can just make yourself known.
And there also, I have heard instances where apps have also given away advertising for free. I know that's been getting less and less, but it never hurts to hit them up and say, hey, I'm a nonprofit, or we're a health organization. We're trying to do some good. Can we get a discount, or can we get some matching or in kind? If we spend some with you, will you give us some? Right? Those are all possibilities.
Matt, are you able to, do we have our contact information at the end of the deck that you can advance to, or did you want to open the clearinghouse?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk to you guys real quickly about some of these resources before you go on. So there's a whole bunch of links in the back of this document, right, that you can click through and go to how to do, how to set up a basic Google ad buy, setting up Google display, right, doing Facebook ad buys. There's links and videos on all of these things. Grindr self-service, where to go to sign up for that. There's a link to the BHOC clearinghouse that Tony was mentioning earlier. There's also a link to keywords. So if you guys are trying to use Google based on keywords that people search for to do your targeting, we've compiled a bunch of keywords here, which will help you. I highly recommend looking at that. There's also information about setting up and doing tracking. Tony mentioned the BHOC dating app info. That'll give you some more information as well on discounts and things like that. But the end here, so there's a media budget calculator. That's the one I was talking about earlier. If you just click this link, you can download it. And I recommend, it's not going to let you edit right there, because whatever edits you make, everyone else would then have to download those edits. So it's locked. But if you just hit download, it's a spreadsheet. You can change it to your heart's content at that point, and you own it. So I recommend using that. I also have some other things in here, like an overview of a brief, like a media brief. And a lot of the stuff that you guys would want to put in these project briefs is going to come from documents you've already created, right? Like in this case, this is one that I got about infant health, right? So a lot of that info you guys have already compiled in other places. Just give it to your media companies, right? Or the people in charge of running your media. So that was kind of it, Jen, that I had here.
Great, thank you so much. There looks like there's at least, let's see, one more question I see here.
Cool.
If you can talk about, and I don't know if you have an example of this or not, experiences about how local programs may be able to combine money to do a bigger ad buy across regions. We were talking about that. You referenced that earlier. Are there any examples of that? And is it easy to contract the money out, or will Grindr or Google accept multiple different payment sources?
Okay, so how do I start this? I haven't done a program with multiple organizations through Grindr. I've done one in Hawaii only through Google. And if you are giving, so I can't answer that across the board. But what I can say is this: if you are willing to partner with other organizations and send your traffic to a single destination, website destination, with similar creative, then you can very easily group your buy together and run it. Especially if you do that with an agency. It's very, like, for example, Water and Stone Marketing. We represent a bunch of different clients. So I already have access to DV360. And I very frequently, like I did for BHOC, put you guys on Programmatic, because even though your budgets may not have been 25,000, I'm getting 10,000 from another client and 5,000 from another one, and et cetera. So I already have access to the platform, right? So running it is very easy. And there'll be other, if you have to spend your money in your jurisdiction, there are lots of agencies out there that are doing advertising across the board, and they could probably put your spend into their portfolio of spends and get you some better access, right? But if you are going to group by organization, you're going to need to have similar creative and a similar destination. Without that, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, Matt, thank you again. It's time for us to wrap up. Please feel free to email us with any questions that you have in the future or right now, and we'll be glad to answer them. Also, Tony's being a little too modest about the inventory. The inventory also contains a lot of information about each app, including contact information, where to buy ads, and he's done a terrific job of assembling it. Also, I just want to stress one more time one of our key points of all of this, which is if you have a campaign, please share it with everybody else, whether or not it was done with public money, private money, whoever funded it. All of us can use each other's campaigns. So with that, I want to thank Matt profusely. I want to thank Charisse and the Office of AIDS for helping us out so much, put this together, and Jen and Tony. And with that, I think we'll wrap. Hope you have a great afternoon and stay safe out there.
It's been a real pleasure, guys. And if you have any questions, let me know. My contact info is in here with Jen's and Dan's as well. So thanks a lot.